All right. Well, this is very exciting for me. When I started this new endeavor, as I joked last week with Pat McAfee, I wrote down a list of names that I wanted to talk to at the very beginning in the very first episodes, and at the very top of this list was this man. Anytime someone asks me who are my favorite sports journalists, anytime someone asks me who I grew up reading, watching, listening to, Stephen Brunt is at the very top of that list. I don't want to age him or make him feel older than me, but I've been listening, watching, reading his work since I, can recall consuming any kind of sports media. If you ask me, he is Canadian sports media royalty. He should be known all across the world, and hopefully after this conversation, a lot more people will know and admire his work and understand why he means so much to so many Canadians. Stephen, massive honor for me. Thank you so much for doing this.
Hey man, thank you. That's all very flattering. And in terms of the age thing, it is what it is, right? It's better than the alternative.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're still kicking. I believe next year you'll celebrate your 40th year in the business, correct?
Oh man. Okay. Let me think about that. Maybe let's see. It's close, but maybe just a little bit. I gotta think. Let me think about that. Not in
82,
sports.
right?
Yeah, 82. I got out of school, and I guess that's true. And then I freelanced for a bit after that. I started at the Globe Globe and Mail in 84. So
Okay.
and I didn't really start writing sports until 1988, 89. So I started out as a news guy.
So yes, started with the Globe and Mail, now work for Rogers Sportsnet on the website, of course, on the radio, on television as well. Like I said, Canadian sports media royalty. I have written an incredible amount of books. At this point, how many books is it? 12, 11, 13?
It's more, but I don't acknowledge every one of them.
Okay. All right.
But I think it's 15 or 16, something like that. I'm working on a couple right now.
Okay, wow. So you're a very busy man, and that's why I really appreciate the time. I'd like to start here if I could. We're taping this on a Tuesday. I'm still a little bit sad about what happened on Sunday afternoon with the Toronto Blue Jays. I've become a Blue Jays fan after my Montreal Expos left in 2004. And, I can become a fan. I could act crazy. I could lose my mind with these games because I don't cover baseball for a living. I'm not a sports columnist. I primarily cover the fights. You cover everything. And I'm wondering if there was ever a time, because I know this team meant a lot to Toronto and to Canada, young guys, they've been through so much. Has there been a time, as of late in your career, where you felt a little too emotionally invested in a team and had to check yourself and say, like, hey, I can't be a fan here. I can't, I still have to keep it down the middle. I still have to be unbiased. Or at this point, have you been doing this for so long where it's all kind of, neutral and you're immune to everything?
No, I'm not. I'm definitely not immune, and I'm not immune by design to some degree. Like I've thought about this a lot over time because I've sat in a million press boxes with no cheering in the press box, right? And it's kind of grim and head down. It doesn't matter what's happening. It could be the greatest game in history, and you're all kind of grimly getting ready to file for deadline. And if anybody says anything or makes a noise, everybody looks at them like they've done something horrible, right? That was that was kind of the etiquette of the press box that I was raised with. I spent all that time in press boxes. But I also saw guys in the business get really, kind of lose the ability to enjoy sports. Like it's weird that people covering sports who kind of hated sports at a certain point because they've been doing it so long and they'd, seen everything and done everything and couldn't get past that to the point where like I was a music critic for a little while in my life, and my wife was a restaurant critic for a little while in her life. I got to eat those meals with her, and I remember how it took the joy out of going to restaurants. It turned going to restaurants into work, and I remember reviewing concerts at certain points and thinking that it was a grind and you didn't really enjoy what you were experiencing. And I made a decision at some point in this sports thing that if I ever lost that, like if I didn't have that anywhere inside me, I'd quit and go do something else. Because what's the point, right? If you can't feel it, it'd be like being an art critic and not appreciating art. Like why would you do it if you don't get any pleasure out of it? So I have tried to keep that part of me alive. And in terms of bias, number one, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, right? None of this stuff matters in the grand scheme of things. I cheer for people because when I get to know people sometimes in the business, in the sports business, athletes, coaches, front office guys, I cheer for them because the ones I like, who I think are good people. I hope they have success. But I'll tell you, like I was at that bat flip game, the Jose Bautista bat flip game in Toronto in 2015. sitting kind of in the stands. And it's one of the greatest things I've ever experienced, because I did let myself go. It was fantastic. And I went to a couple of these games in Toronto this fall when they finally let us back in the stadium with my sons, and went to a couple of ball games and just sat there and felt the feel of being in a crowd for the first time in 2 years, and ate a hot dog and drank a beer and cheered. Cheered. If you, again, I think if that's gone completely, you might as well go cover Wall Street.
Has there ever been a point where you felt like you were actually losing it, that passion, that love, where it was getting to be too much? It wasn't fun anymore.
Yeah, there were definitely nights when it wasn't fun. There were definitely nights grinding it out to deadline when it wasn't fun. And this really goes back to newspaper days, right? Or when, I've got kids, you miss a lot of stuff in your life if you're in that job. You miss things happening in your real life. All kinds of events take place when you're on the road somewhere in some crappy Marriott, and you wonder why you're doing it. And there were moments like that for sure over time. But I'm kind of, no, my friend David Schultz, who used to work for the Globe with me, always referred to sports writers generally as the happy warriors of newspaper, like that we actually enjoyed our lives more than most people did. And I'm with that. I like the positive way outweighed the negative, and the pleasure I got out of it has way outweighed any kind of aggravation or cynicism that crept in.
Do you remember where you were, how old you were, what prompted your desire to become a sports journalist? Or maybe I should say actually a journalist, because as you said, you started out not going into sports. You went to school and studied journalism. But when did this dream sort of start for you?
Well, it's like I'm different than most guys, because most people who cover sports have always wanted to cover sports, and that's what they did. And they one way or another, they were covering sports in high school or in university or whatever, and they went into sports journalism, where they were failed athletes. I'm a non-athlete. Like I'm failed would be flattering to what I really was. I always liked sports. I was always a fan, and I was passionate about it. But I'm a failed musician, so I went into journalism when I realized I couldn't be successful as a musician or even get a music degree, which is what I had hoped to do originally. So I started writing about music as a way to kind of keep myself involved with music. So when I was in university, and again, kind of came to that realization that, I'm going to get an English degree here, I'm not going to get a music degree, and I'm not good enough. And I don't, I also don't care about it the way you have to care about it to be a real musician. I tip my cap. My dad was a musician. I tip my cap to people who are real musicians. I wasn't I wasn't willing, and I wasn't good enough. But I started covering concerts as a lark, reviewing records back in the day when there were records, but as a way to kind of keep my hand in with music while I had no idea what I was going to do. So that's where I started. And, I started out at a university paper, and then I worked for the newspaper in the city where the university was located, doing that on the side while I was in school. And then I went to the Globe as an intern, doing it in the arts section. I went to journalism schools in grad school, but I went to a journalism school where they didn't acknowledge that arts journalism or sports journalism existed. It really wasn't part of the curriculum at all. And I kind of worked my way into the Globe through that channel and through freelancing. And then I got laid off as a student in the depths of a recession. Got hired back as a news reporter, general news reporter, which I'd never done except for journalism school stuff. And then I went into sports because a job opened up. The Globe had a sports feature writing job at the time, and I'd done a lot of long form stuff, a lot of feature writing. And I applied for it, and I got it, and I became the sports columnist when the sports columnist retired, or was retired, mandatory retirement. And I applied for the job and got it. But I had never thought about being a sports journalist ever, aside from goofing around with sports radio in school. I never thought about it until the job came open, to be honest. There was not my lifelong dream, and I came at it really through a circuitous route.
Wow. But did you grow up a sports fan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I grew up watching everything. Around here, I grew up before there was Major League Baseball in Toronto, but the Detroit Tigers were the closest team. Then the Expos, were very important to me. Fergie Jenkins playing for the Cubs, a Canadian playing for the Cubs. I grew up in the Canadian Football League in Hamilton, where I am now, and the NFL. I love boxing, and watch boxing on TV with my dad. All that stuff. I love sports, but not in a way that's like as I say, most of the folks that I know in this business, that's the only channel they went down. I never thought of it as anywhere where I would ever make a living, for sure.
By the way, what instrument did you play? Like, what was the
I
dream?
played trombone, man, which is not glamorous.
Wow.
Although,
Okay.
yeah, but my dad played trombone. He played with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra and a bunch of other bands. And yeah, it's not an instrument you can take to the beach. So yeah, but yeah, I played in bands and had a lot of fun doing it and joined the union and all that stuff. But you know, that there are limits. There were limits to my ability.
AJ Liebling, who is that to you?
Yeah, well, he's a hero, right? He's one of my heroes for sure. You know, the sweet science, not just the sweet science, but all of his kind of cultural writing and his food writing and all of that stuff he did. You know, writing for the New Yorker, and his writing about Paris, but especially his writing about boxing. The Sweet Science is obviously the most famous one. There's a collection of essays called The Telephone Booth Indian, which is not about boxing mostly, but great kind of observational pieces. They're of the time. So anybody who goes back and reads them, there's going to be stuff in the language and stuff in the attitudes that are of that moment. But I would encourage people not to just cancel them, you know, read them and kind of take them in context. But yeah, a great reader, a passionate consumer of food and alcohol and life. Yeah, I think anybody who's ever watched who likes boxing, who likes combat sports ought to dive into the Sweet Science for sure. The collection Sweet Science, it's magnificent stuff.
So what I've always appreciated about you, in addition to your great coverage of, you know, the traditional sports, is your love and your interest in combat sports. So when I would come on, say, one of your shows, you didn't kind of look down on me for being the MMA guy or the fighting guy. It was very clear that you had a deep appreciation for it. And correct me if I'm wrong, was it the interest in boxing that kind of opened this door to this career? And in particular, you know, your pieces on the corruption in boxing in Ontario in 1988, which you won an award for. It was that incredible. Is that kind of what started all of this path down the sports journalism road?
Yeah, I guess it really did. I guess that's true. I wrote a little bit of, I kind of spun off some boxing stuff to the sports section at the newspaper just for fun. Like I remember I went down to Detroit to try and find Leon Spinks after he had lost the rematch to Ali, and he was making a comeback, and he was at the Kronk gym. And I spent 3 days in Detroit. It was a learning experience, waiting for Leon Spinks to show up. He never showed up. But I just wanted to go to the Kronk, right? That like the whole reason for that story was just so I could go to Detroit and hang out at the Kronk gym, which was amazing. You know, in the old gym in the basement with all the kind of legendary stuff. And yeah, I did do a series of investigative stuff. The best, you know, pure journalism I've ever done about the lack of enforcement of the rules in Ontario and the way the sport was being run. So yeah, but you know, you couldn't make in those days, like you definitely there were guys in those days in the States where newspapers had beat guys on boxing, right? They had actual beat writers. Like that was my dream, was to do what, you know, like Michael Katz did, or, you know, one of those guys who were actual boxing beat writers, but there was no such thing in Canada. So you're going to go into sports, you're going to have to do other stuff. But I was the de facto boxing beat writer when I got into the sports section, along with the other stuff I did.
Are you still into boxing? I mean, boxing, I think, is enjoying a great time. There's a huge heavyweight title fight happening this weekend, coincidentally, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder 3. Are you still as passionate about it or less these days?
I really enjoy it. Like I watched the Joshua Usyk fight a couple of weeks ago, and I got a huge kick of watching Usyk. I thought he was, you know, it reminded me of the first big fight I covered, big fight in Vegas, was Michael Spinks, Larry Holmes. Undefeated light heavyweight champion, undefeated heavyweight champion, trying to break the Marciano record, and Spinks beat him and outsmarted him in that fight. And like Anthony Joshua is not Larry Holmes. You know, Larry Holmes is one of the 10 greatest heavyweights of all time. Anthony Joshua, I think, is a bit of a fraud, but it reminded me of that. You know, I reminded just watching in the scene. I wish I'd been there. That 70,000 people, and then watching the underdog kind of with no fear take over. Like that's a pure kind of combat sport moment, right? I don't know you could replicate what happened in that fight in any other sport that way. So that, yeah, I still tune in. I'll watch Wilder Fury. I'm fascinated by, you know, obviously, as with always, a lot of the best stuff is not in the heavyweight division, but yeah, look, I'm not as zoned in as I was. Like I covered Tyson's entire career, for instance, from literally beginning to literally the end. And I'm not going to make an argument for him as a fighter or as a human being, but it was an amazing story. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not locked in like I was then, or like when I was doing, covering Leonard and Hagler and Hearns and Duran and people like that. But I still love it, and I'll still go out of my way to watch it.
By the way, just as a quick aside, why is Anthony Joshua a fraud?
I know fraud is too strong, but I just don't think. I think he's a guy who looks like a fighter, but I'm not sure he's a fighter. I think he was exposed in that fight, and I think he's been exposed a couple of times. And as I kind of roll back the tape, I wonder what. Maybe Vladimir Klitschko was more shot than I thought he was in that fight, because that was the one where I thought, boy, this guy's for real, because I love Vladimir Klitschko. But I thought Usyk just kind of took his soul away in that fight. And, if you're a great fighter, that's not what happens. So fraud's too strong. And I should, and I just violated one of my own rules, Ariel, because everybody who steps through the ropes or into the, into the octagon or whatever you want to say, like they've all got bigger balls than me. I learned that lesson years ago. So I take that back. They're all way more brave than I am. So, but I think he's a bit of a creation, and he's not the first one in combat sports history or boxing history. He's not the first guy that's been kind of built up to be something that maybe he isn't. But I've been around before. The first time I saw Tyson Fury on a fight in Quebec City of all places, I had no idea. I'm still not sure what I was looking at. And I thought, this is ridiculous. The guy doesn't look like he has a muscle on his body. He's awkward. He's huge, but he doesn't look like he has any power. And I've come to believe that the guy's kind of a genius. I think he's an amazing fighter.
As you mentioned earlier, you've been in the newspaper business, or you were in the newspaper business for about 30 or so years. Globe and Mail, one of the most respected papers in Canada. I'm wondering how you feel about the newspaper business now. It's been obviously much discussed, the demise. You're now working, for Rogers, digital, TV, radio, obviously not in the newspaper business. Do you think there will ever be a day where newspapers come back and are as important, or is that period just dead? Will that never happen again?
I think they're important in a lot of ways still. It's funny. It's exactly 10 years ago this month that I left the paper. So. Wow. So I've been out of the newspaper business for 10 years now, which time flies. And I left in large part because I kind of saw what was going to happen to sports, in a newspaper like that, like the Globe, which is a general kind of a business oriented, politically oriented newspaper, kind of the Canadian New York Times in a lot of ways. But I saw that sports was not going to be a priority there. And I could have been the last man standing, but I thought that wouldn't be much fun. So that's why I left. I think newspapers still are incredibly important if they can find any kind of a business model, not in the sports sense, but important, in terms of freedom and, holding our political leaders to account and all of the important functions of journalism, investigative work that's still being done. There's still great work being done, but, I worry about the business model, and I worry what would happen if they're not there. Obviously on a local level, in a lot of places they're gone, right? And that's a tragedy, and I think it's really bad for democracy, and that's these are tough times for democracy anyway. So I hope that the long answer, but I hope they hang in terms of sports. That content's is coming from other places now, and that's not going to change.
When I think of ethics, when I think of doing things the right way journalistically, I think of you. That's why I hold you to such high regard, in such high regard, and I'm wondering if at any point you felt compromised, or look, I'll be honest, there are times where I felt this way and I've made my mistakes, and I'll be the first to admit it. But you do work for Rogers, who owns the Blue Jays. Have you ever been in a position where you were told not to say something? Don't be critical. Hey, try not to, has it ever been tough? I would imagine it has been, maybe not for you, but for others. Have you ever felt like, this is flying a little too close to the sun?
No, honestly, no. But this is a unique situation. Like Rogers, for people who don't know, is this massive tech company. It's a phone company and an internet company, and it has a media wing and a sports wing, which includes ownership of the Blue Jays and includes Sportsnet, the all sports network that I work for. Used to have more magazines and things like that, but they've mostly gotten rid of them. They're mostly out of the media business except for sports. I think if I think if I had a public opinion about, one of the mergers they're involved in, or the cell spectrum, or some of the stuff that really matters to their business, they probably wouldn't be thrilled about it. But in sports, the churn, the conversation around a team, positive or negative, is part of the content, right? So if the Jays are bad, and that Rogers also owns a piece of the Leafs and a piece of the Raptors and a piece of Toronto FC through Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. But that conversation about fire the coach, or get rid of this guy, or why aren't they signing this free agent? That's part of the product, and I'm not sure there's anything you could say that they would actually object to on a corporate level, because it's all, none of that's bad for them. And even sometimes that would extend to even people talking about the owners should spend more money. But no, there's never been any pushback. But I think the reason, Ariel, is because, honest to God, I'm not sure it means anything. Like, it's not like you're pulling down the pillars around you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just chatter. So I'm not sure there's anything I could say about the sports part of the company that would raise a red flag. I honestly don't.
I wish a few MMA promoters would subscribe to that line of thinking as well. But I guess the one time where it could have gotten a little bit dicey was when Alex Anthopoulos left and Shapiro came in, and the fans were unhappy and all this stuff. And I understand, I think you have a very good relationship with Shapiro, and it seems like it's all paid off. I mean, look at the team now, look at the product now. But even in those early days where everyone seemed to love Alex, and he's coming off that 2015 season, and Shapiro comes in, and it felt like he wasn't truly invested in the market in Canada. He's this guy coming from Cleveland. You never felt like you couldn't say one thing or the other.
Well, I've got a really good relationship with Alex too.
Yeah.
So I consider Alex a friend, and I got to know him very, and I was his friend when the fans wanted to run him out of town on a rail, by the way,
Right.
which was about 6 months before he became a hero.
Right.
Welcome to sports, right?
Right.
But no, I just tried. What I tried to do in that circumstance was be fair. They hired Mark Shapiro as the president of the team to replace Paul Beeston, who was retiring. It didn't have anything to do with Alex per se, I think that Mark Shapiro was a guy who's well respected in the baseball world, and they wanted to modernize the business of the team and do a bunch of stuff that wasn't, the Jays were being run in a lot of ways that the way they've been run for 40 years, and they wanted to modernize it. And I just kind of wanted to take him, when Mark arrived, I'm one of the first guys that sat down and talked to him. I just kind of wanted to take him for what he was, to understand him, be fair, just like I would to anybody else. And there was a lot of knee-jerk stuff because there's an emotional component, because 2015 was 2015. As I say, the team turned around. They had the crazy trade deadline. They ended up in the postseason. Alex, who's a Canadian, becomes a national hero, and then he decides he can't work for the new guys, or the new guys decide that he can work for them only under certain circumstances, which is kind of normal. Like, new boss hires their own guy. Like, I've seen it a million times in sports. And had they not made the postseason that year, everybody would have said, "Good riddance. Let's get a new guy in here and let's change things up." They hadn't won a World Series since '93. They hadn't been in the postseason since '93. So, I thought Mark actually walked into an emotional dynamic that was not of his own doing. And then you got a bunch of knee-jerk stuff about, they don't know Toronto, or they don't care, or he seems cold, or, that's stuff. That's just throwing stuff from the outside and not trying to actually figure it out. It's lazy. And I get it. It's like fire the coach, right? Mm-hmm. And anybody can write fire the coach. It's the cheapest sentence in sports. Fire the coach. And I thought I owed him a little bit more than that, and journalistically. So yeah, I just tried to be fair, try to get to know the guy a little bit, try and figure out what he's trying to do.
You're one of the last remaining journalists that I can think of who is not on social media. No Twitter, yes. No Instagram. And I know you've talked in the past about some people trying to nudge you in that direction. How is this possible? How have you been? And I commend you, and I think it's probably great for your mental health and your sanity to not be on there. But how have you resisted the urge of signing up, unless you have a burner account that no one knows about?
No, I do not. I've been accused, but I do not. And, there's times when I probably, not for my own, kind of self-promotion, but in terms of news, like, there's times that it probably would have been a good thing to be there just to know what was happening 5 seconds faster than I would otherwise. But the decision actually, this is before, like, early days of this kind of stuff, and it actually goes back pre-social media to stuff like even at the newspaper, when it was about, we want you to interact with readers, right? We're going to have comment sections. We want you to interact with readers. And I always argued, and this is very old school, that I was not the product, right? The product was what I created. And I put this thing out there, which in that, newspaper case would be a story of one form or another, text, and people reacted to the product. They reacted to the thing I did, not me. I'm not it. Like that's separate from me. And I want that to be separate from me. That's react to it, love it, hate it. But I don't want a personal relationship with the people who consume that necessarily. They might be great people, and I might get to know people who read me and all of that stuff, but that's not me. And what I found was that blurring of the idea that, I'm going to interact. No, here, what I have to say is here in this thing. And again, like it or don't like it, but that's my job, and that's my skill, is in creating that thing. It's not in being, I don't want to be, it's not a public forum about me. So that's kind of the principle, and that's a very old school, right? And that's the back of the day when people, if they wanted to complain about something you wrote, would have to write a letter and actually think about it and send it to somebody, and then the paper would publish it. This kind of instant reaction, you suck, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it's good for anybody. I don't think it's edifying in any way. And now you could argue that what I do now, I am more of the product myself, because but I kind of think I'm, in terms of if I'm doing broadcast work and if I'm actually on screen or on a mic, I'm a performer, like, if somebody, I'm not comparing myself to a movie star, but if, the movie that somebody is in and the performance in the movie is not the person, it's a thing, it's something separate from them. And I want that separation. And I want that separation from my life. Like that's, I don't know how people now guys who live on Twitter, who seem to be there all the time. And that's part of the deal, is that, they're commenting on everything. I don't want to comment on everything. I want to go away and do something else. I want to go hear a band, I want to go out for dinner. I want to travel. I want to go fishing. I don't want to be on call all the time. And I don't think I owe that to anybody. So it's selfish to a point, but it all comes with that. The core idea is that the thing is not me and I am not the thing. And if you like or don't like what I do, you have every right to talk about it and say what you want about it, but that's not me.
So to that point, you've written, as we said, 15, 16, 17 books. And to the best of my knowledge, none of them have been about you. None of them have been about your career. It's been about guys like Brian Burke or Facing Ali, Bobby Orr. And I have to admit, the one I want to read the most is about you. That's why I have you on here. Will you ever write a book about yourself and your career? Never.
No.
Why?
No, I don't. I've hardly ever used the word I in print,
right?
Because I was, that was the way you did it. You weren't supposed to, I think is cheap, right? Anybody can write that. I've written very few personal things ever professionally. I wrote one piece years ago when my two sons were little kids. They're adults now, and I took them to see Ali in Berrien Springs, to Ali's farm in Berrien Springs. I took them to meet Ali, and I wrote about my own kids in that visit. And it was a very sentimental piece for me for obvious reasons, and there was only one way to write it. But aside from that, I've almost never used the word I in print, and or in whatever we are now, non-print. One of my sports writing heroes was a guy named Milt Donnell, who was a longtime columnist at the Toronto Star and a real mentor to me in a lot of ways, and very kind to me, even though we worked for competitive papers. And he worked well into his 80s, and he'd covered everything. So I'd be sitting in a fight with him and say, Milt, you ever seen anything like this? And he'd say, well, at the first Marciano Walcott fight, or when Bobby Thompson hit the shot heard round the world, because he was there. Wow. He was there. So, and Milt wrote, there's been a lot of cheesy columnists over the years who wrote their farewell, my farewell to sports and my career in sports, guys who couldn't carry his notepad. And Milt Donnell's last column was about Larry Walker. It was the story of the day, and he handed it into the Star and said, I'm done.
Wow.
And I always thought to me, that's what a pro does. Because that's, again, it's an old fashioned way of doing it. And I know there are other ways to do it. But I thought that's To me, that's how you do it. File your last column about the story of the day, do your job, hit your deadline, and get the hell out. So yeah, no, I'm never going to write a memoir.
Wow. Well, I respect it. I would love to read it. I respect it. That story you just mentioned about your kids going to meet Ali, that sounds like the most unbelievable trip. How close were you to Ali? I mean, I would imagine he doesn't let everyone come with his kids to go meet him. And what year is
Oh no,
this?
it's a funny one because you can find the story somewhere. It's on, it is out there if anybody wants to read it. It was in the Globe, and I published it in a collection of sports writing that not just my sports writing, but a lot of Canadian sports writing. I got to know Davis Miller, who wrote a book called The Tao of Muhammad Ali. Is a really interesting character, Davis, and he had spent a lot of time around Ali, and he told me that when Ali was living in Berrien Springs, which is kind of just a little bit east of Chicago. He said people showed up at Ali's door all the time, and he just let him in because he liked people, and he liked company, he liked people, and he liked being Muhammad Ali. So I was actually at a wedding in Chicago. I was in a wedding party for a guy who, along with Lennox Lewis, a friend of mine, John Hornewer, is a lawyer who was Lennox Lewis's lawyer for a long time, and we were driving back, and on our way back to Ontario, and we're driving by. I saw the sign for Berrien Springs, and I said to my wife, I knew this. I told her the story, and I said, you want to don't take 20 minutes. Why don't we go and just see? So we drove off. We go to the little town Berrien Springs, go to like a gas station, and say, where's Muhammad Ali's house? And the guy said, oh yeah, it's right down the road. So drove down the road, and there's a big gate and a security thing. It's all locked up, obviously, and there's a little intercom and a button, and it says M. Ali. Like almost in one, I don't know if it was one of those dino type things, but it was like, one of those little labels, MLE. So hit the note, and the woman's voice on the other side says hello. And I said, hi, I'm from Canada. I grew up worshiping Ali, and I just wanted to say hello. And the gate opens. And so we drive up the driveway, and we up this lovely house, and there's actually a carload of people from Germany driving out when we drive in. So that tells you something.
Yeah.
And Ali's wife comes out to greet us out back, and she said, oh yeah, he's in the office here. Come on in and see him. So I took my eldest son, who was, I don't know, 4 then, I guess. My wife and my other son, who was a baby then, just held back for a second. And we walked in, and we're led into this room, and he was sitting in a big easy chair, and he was, this is Parkinson's Ali. He was not in great shape, but he said, where are you from? And we, kind of told him my story. My kid played around and, got his TV channel changer and turned on his TV and did all kinds of little kid stuff. And we had just kind of a quiet few minutes. And then I kind of thought, it's maybe time to go now. It just felt appropriate. They were preparing, his wife and her mother were preparing a meal in the kitchen. So we walked out and went out to the driveway, and Ali came out with us, and he was shuffling. And my son was in kind of a knights in armor phase at that point. He had a plastic sword, and Ali got the sword, took the sword from him, and started sword fighting with my son.
Wow.
And my wife was there, and Ali had just adopted, they had just adopted their son, Assad, who was Ali's youngest kid. And so his wife brought the baby out, and Ali had the baby in his hands, and and his hands were shaking. And then he handed the baby to my wife, and he said, watch my feet, to my kids, watch my feet. And he did this trick, which he used to do magic tricks, right? It was part of his thing. And he did this trick where it made it look like he was levitating.
Wow.
And it looked like he rose off the ground. So and it's, you got to imagine, again, very frail Ali with the tremors and all of the kind of symptoms of Parkinsonism. But in this moment, he goes very still, and then it looks like he rises off the ground. And and my kid, Nathaniel, my oldest, was the whole drive back. How did that man fly? How did that man fly? And I said, it's magic, because it was magic.
Wow.
It's one of the greatest moments of my life, because it was pure and perfect. And, I wasn't there as a journalist. Like I had to think about writing the piece because I wasn't there as a journalist, and I hadn't identified myself as a journalist. But I decided that, because I was really going to write, I was really writing about me, and my feelings and being a father. and other stuff. It wasn't an interrogation of Muhammad Ali or an expose of Muhammad Ali. It was an homage to Muhammad Ali. And I had to think twice and three times about whether I would do it, but I'm glad I did.
Did you get a chance to tell him what he meant to you?
Yeah, I did. Although, I'm not like I was like the millionth person that day probably who had told him that, right? And and then I've spent a lot of time thinking about Ali my whole life and writing about him, and writing the book, the Facing Ali, where I talked to the people, guys who fought him, and I have a had a great soft spot in my heart for Joe Frazier, who hated Ali, and I think Ali's a complicated figure. I think he's not. I like part of what I kind of push back on, and maybe the piece does the opposite, was the kind of sentimentalization of Ali. Kind of turning him into this kind of harmless, silent Buddha figure. That's not what he was. And he had flaws. As a person. I remember I did a thing with Layla once, and talked about that a little bit. And yeah, he's he had feet of clay like the rest of us, right? But yeah, that he had an aura. He really. There really was. I was in his presence a few other times in my life, but yeah, that one with my kids, because it was my kids.
Yeah, wow. It gives me chills hearing you talk about that. I can't imagine what that was like. These days, you're doing more talking, right? More on the radio, more on TV, less writing. As an old school guy, how do you feel about that?
It's way easier doing this stuff than writing.
Right.
Everything. You know what? Everything's easier than writing. So I don't miss deadlines. I don't miss grinding it out in a press box with my, after my 6 cup of coffee, trying to hit a deadline off a ball game or something like that. I don't miss that at all. I'm still, I kind of write what I want to write now. So, I'm working on another book with Jordan Tutu. I did a book with him, and I think which was an important book, I think, in a lot of ways, in terms of, his heritage and identity, and some of the issues around the First Nations communities, and about hockey. But so I'm working with him on stuff. I'm doing stuff I want to do now, really, on the writing side, and I'm having fun with the broadcast part of it. I'm probably not going to do it forever, but it keeps me engaged, and I get to work with a lot of talented people. We do some features and documentaries as well. I really like working with a great producer and a great shooter on a documentary is really, I love working with people who are super talented. And I get to work with young people. It's kind of the opposite. When I was at the newspaper, it was just aging out. And in this gig, everybody's way younger than me, and I love that. So yeah, it's fun. But I have no desire to go back to grinding out 5 columns a week.
In addition to the great writing, the work on the radio, TV, I still lament the fact that The Lead is no longer a podcast. I love that podcast.
Thanks.
And I would urge anyone, they kind of stand still, they're evergreen. So anyone out there, look up The Lead, and those episodes, you and Jeff Blair, are tremendous. I was honored to be on one episode. Your essay work on television, I think, will also be a part of your legacy. I think you're the best at it. Canada, US, Germany, England, no one does it like you. And the 2010 one, which I'm sure you hear about all the time, to me is kind of the gold standard. In fact, I was asked a few times throughout my career at this point to do stuff like that, whether it was for Fox or ESPN, and I 100% tried to copy your style. Came nowhere near as good. And I even told him, I don't think, to me, you were the gold standard, and I can't come close to it. And then, at that point, I don't want to even try, because I view you as the top, and what you did in 2010 captured, for anyone that doesn't know, in 2010 Winter Olympics, the only Olympics I had the chance to cover at this point in my life. It's in Vancouver. It started off horribly, and then by the end, I don't know if Canada ever felt more proud of itself. And it ends with Sidney Crosby in the golden goal. How often do you hear about that? And by the way, when's the last time you watched that? I just watched it last night, and it still gives me chills and makes me cry every time, especially with the dude drinking the beer coming through it's just an amazing thing what you did there. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it was a moment, It was a moment. And again, I had to kind of resist some of my, impulses to kind of to deconstruct it. Sometimes it's not a good idea to deconstruct everything. You got to kind of let things happen. That's something I've learned over the years. Let things happen and go with them, and allow yourself to feel what's going on around you. And that was a very, very powerful time to be in Vancouver and to experience that. And I've been to a million Olympics before that, and I had no problem being cynical about the IOC, and I was in Atlanta, which was horrible, and so yeah, I had to kind of let free myself to feel that stuff and do it and to perform. That's the first time I really felt like I thought of myself as a performer, with the help from some people I worked with who said, "Look, don't just this isn't a read. You've got to perform this." But yeah, it changed. I'll never do anything that has more of an impact in this country than that. The 30 million people almost were, watching TV that night here, and they all saw it. And that music, the Hey Rosetta, the band, the music that's on there, they're good friends of mine. I every time I hear them play the song, it brings me, and people come up to me all the time. Still, geez, it's a long, it's 11 years ago, right? More than 11 years ago, people still come up to me and talk to me about it. So, yeah, I'm kind of glad I got to channel it. I felt like I was channeling something for people, and they're not all, like everything I've done is not like that for sure. But I think that in that unique moment, and I was working with a guy named Matt Dunn, who I got a shout out to because he was the producer on that piece. That was a collaboration in every way.
Do you think that changed the course of your career? Was that a turning point in your career?
Yep. Oh yeah. That's what was the beginning of the end of my newspaper career,
right,
to be honest, because I was in Vancouver. I'd been seconded to work for the broadcast consortium. I wasn't really working for the Globe, but the Globe was owned at that point by the same people by Bell. And after that, I was offered the opportunity to kind of move over and become a multi-platform guy with what was then Bell Globe Media, which was TSN. That all fell apart because for a bunch of reasons before it ever happened. But that was my first step out of the door of the newspaper, really. And yeah, that's kind of really, that was the end of my newspaper life. And I owe Keith Pally and Scott Moore and the guys who allowed me to make the transition. I owe them a lot because it's been great for me.
I know you're very busy. You've got a new show, Drive Time Show, on Sportsnet, 590 The Fan. Do we have a few more minutes? Can I ask you a few more things?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, for sure.
I appreciate it very much. Were you in New York City on 9/11?
No, I was not there on 9/11, but I was there for the first sporting events that happened after 9/11, which would be the Trinidad Bernard Hopkins fight and a Giants game. Trinidad Bernard Hopkins fight happened on, I'm thinking, the 28th of September. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
It was really raw. It was really raw. And again, I'm not going to pretend I experienced it because I didn't, but I did. I remember I wouldn't fly. I just couldn't fly to New York. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I took the train.
Wow.
And I remember coming out of Penn Station and walking up through into the city that, well, I now know what a deserted city looks like again, because we've just gone through it, right? But think of that and all of those handmade posters of people who were missing, all the walls of Penn Station just plastered with those. And then walking out into New York that I couldn't imagine, didn't recognize. And, the night at that fight, I remember they brought out, that fight was supposed to happen, I think the 13th or something, and then it was pushed back, but it was the first thing that happened. And they brought out a bunch of firefighters and cops who they, gave tickets to, and the whole place, everybody crying. It was, there's a lot of water in the bridge. And I know there's a lot of people now who don't really have a memory of it, which is kind of freaks me out. But yeah, it was a time. And at the Giants game out in the Meadowlands, the old Giants stadium, there was a moment where, it's on the flight path to Newark, right? And a plane came over really low over the stadium right before the game. And the whole place just, like, people froze. There was, honest to God, fear, and because you just didn't know. Now we know how the story ends. Then you didn't know how the story was going to end. And then the World Series that fall, of course, which was, helicopters over the stadium, all kinds of anti-bombing stuff around the stadium, the president going out to throw out the first pitch with, insane security, the Olympics after that, the Super Bowl after that. It was, but yeah, that first, I say, walking out of Penn Station that day, that, less than 3 weeks after, I'll never forget.
Speaking of America, I've always wondered, have you ever considered, or were you ever close to coming over to the States to work here for any considerable amount of time?
No one ever asked. My dad was an American,
Oh,
so
really?
I could have, but no one asked. I
That blows
remember
my mind. No one asked?
no, we
Really?
kind of people don't pay that much attention to us up here. They I remember when the National started,
Mm.
and I remember thinking, boy, I want to be the boxing writer for the National. That'd be the greatest gig. I think Sam Donnellan got that gig. He was a really good boxing writer from Philly. But I always thought that would be like, I'll drop everything. I quit the Globe. I'll go for that. Now, of course, that would have been a very bad idea because I would have had one great year and then the National imploded, right? But that's the only time I even really thought about it. I like Canada. I like being a Canadian. I like living here. I get to experience all the great stuff about the States, and I get to live here. That's good for me.
Do you have any regrets? Any things in your career that you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, I'm sure there's stuff like
There's not a glaring one?
there's some stuff I wrote some stuff that I think was cruel and it shouldn't have been. I think it's funny, when you're cocky and you're young and you feel like you got it. And this guy, I'm going to sound like an old dude on a bench here, but you feel like you can say anything about anybody you want, and I'm right, you're wrong. I've got the platform, and the kind of being provocative for the sake of being provocative. It's not like something I did a lot, to be honest, but there's a few I'd take back that I just thought, I was wrong, and I was wrong to do that, to be cruel to somebody. Like I told you, at the beginning of the conversation, when we were talking about Anthony Joshua, like I wrote one of the real pivotal experiences for me. This is weird. I was at a fight. Donnie Lalonde, remember the light heavyweight champion, right? He was a Canadian. So he's fighting, I think it's after he lost to Leonard. And he's fighting at a kind of this mega nightclub up in Kitchener, Ontario, which is not far from where I live here. And it was just a cheeseball fight, right? And he's from there. And they brought in a guy from West Virginia to lose to him, right? By definition, that was the guy's job, obviously. And if you know boxing, that's how it works. And so Donnie Lalonde, dispatches this guy in 7 rounds, and the guy looks, he's not in shape, and he's got kind of trunks don't fit, and he's got nobody real in his corner. I'm writing the story after the fight, and a guy came up on this little tiny press row, 4 of us, and said, "I just want you guys are all going to say that this guy was a bum, right? That he's a tomato can. I'm going to tell you something about him." And he talked about this guy and about his life, and about his wife had left him, and he didn't have any money, and he took the fight on short notice, and he drove himself up there from, again, Indiana or somewhere like that, like one of those places where those guys come from. And he just said, I just wanted you guys to know that. And that, because that taught me a lot, right? That there's always another side, and there's always a human being there. Even though we turn these guys into kind of supermen, there's always a human being in there somewhere. And they're not all great people. It's just like, if you walk down the street, you're going to get a wide range of human beings. Sorry about that. I'm just going to deal with that. Old school. I have a landline.
I love that. I love that.
But it taught me something. And like, that's what informed that book. When I did Facing Ali, that's what informed that book. What about the other guys? Like, I can write about, like, I want to write about Jean-Pierre Coupman. I want to write about Brian London, the guys who were, joke guys, right? Guys didn't belong in the same ring with Ali. I want to write about those guys because there's got to be a story there, and they're human, and I want to understand what they felt like, So that, again, long answer, but I think that I hope I've developed some empathy over the years, over those, nearly 40 years. And maybe I lacked a bit of that at certain points early in my career. So that would be my regret.
2 last things. One is personal. Most people won't care about this, but I deeply care about this. Do you think in our lifetime we will see baseball return to Montreal? What about this
Yes.
Tampa?
Yes.
You do.
Yes.
You do.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. It might be it might be this weird split season thing, man. But
You're that confident?
I don't want to speak for anybody, but
okay.
I know some of the guys in Montreal.
Yes.
I know what their level of confidence is.
Wow.
So if they're that confident, I'm that confident. And I think it's going to be, I think you're going to hear something before the end of this year about a stadium in Griffintown.
Come on.
And yeah, I think this thing's way down the road, and I think there's political support for it there. And I think a downtown outdoor stadium in the summertime in Montreal. You ready to move back, buddy?
I have told my wife, who is also from Montreal, the moment this happens, we're packing up. It's been a good 20 years here, but I'm going home. I would love to work that year. I would love to be a beat writer for that team. That team meant so much to me. You're blowing my mind with your confidence here.
No, I really normally I would look at, if I didn't if I didn't know anybody involved in this process, I would be as skeptical as anyone, because it doesn't make any sense to me. Still, I still don't understand the 81-81 thing. I don't get that at all.
I don't get that. Why would any player agree to that, or why would the Players Association agree to that?
That's maybe because these guys maybe they'll spend more than a raise on payroll,
right?
But I know the folks in Montreal, and they're serious, right? These are not just some chumps. They're serious people, and they have serious resources, and they have believed in this thing for a long time, and their level of confidence has not wavered. So yeah, I think stuff's coming. So you might have to call a real estate agent.
Wow, that is exciting stuff. And I hope the Jays are supportive of it. I know a lot of fans were upset that they voted in favor of the contraction, but I think this would be good for baseball in Canada.
Oh, I think so too. More's better. Whether they stay in the American League or the American League East, I don't know. Like, there's talk that they might flip up to the National League, but no, I think more is better. I think there's room for both. And this is a great time for baseball in Canada. The audience has turned over. It's not just the remember when crowd. There's a young, vital baseball audience in Canada right now. And I think there's loads of room. And I think, well, again, you know Montreal better than me, but I spent a lot of time covering the Expos back in the day in that horrible stadium, but that thing could have survived. There's the myriad issues, the myriad reasons why it didn't survive, but it wasn't because people didn't care about baseball. People did care about baseball.
Last thing, do you think you will be, and again, thank you so much for this. I've enjoyed every second.
I love talking to you, Eric.
Thank you. Do you think you will be that guy who hands in the last column at 80 and walks away? Do you want to do this until you're 80? Red Fisher, a legend in Montreal. I think of him, like he was there till 90 something in my mind. Do you think you'll be that guy, or do you think you'll end relatively soon and enjoy your final days?
I don't think I'll be in a press box, like grinding it out like Red did. Like that's a different gig. I'm happy they pay me to do what I do now, and that I can enjoy what I do. And, I'll continue to do it until either they don't want me or I don't enjoy it anymore. I always have side projects on the go, and I always have. I've still got a bit of the freelancer in me. So I've always got a bit of a side hustle, of one sort or another. So I think whatever happens, I'll keep doing that. I think I'll always write. I think I'll always write. I hope I can always write. But yeah, I don't think it'll be as abrupt as what Milt did. Of course, Milt just went and played blackjack. He lived to 101, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he was playing blackjack till he was 100. So he went to the casino. So he had a plan. But yeah, I would like to think that I could, take my kind of elder statesman status and, kind of play off that a little bit and enjoy it, and still get to go to some games and still get to go to spring training and the stuff that I really love. And maybe get to sit ringside every once in a while.
Oh, that would be great. Yes, I remember, I think the first time we met in person was at Mayweather-McGregor in Las Vegas.
Yes.
You were with Arash Madani. I thought, okay, this is a big event. Stephen Brunt has crossed the border to cover this crazy circus fight. I hope that you will write forever. I hope that you'll be around forever. I was trying to explain the guys working on this podcast with me about you. They're American. Please forgive them. I was like, this is Bob Costas. This is Hunter Thompson. This is the voice of Canadian sports, in my opinion. And what you've done for people like me to show the way on what it means to be a good journalist, I can't thank you enough for that. What a career. And I was telling our mutual friend Ryan from Sportsnet, who helped set this up, about just like how much you meant to me, and for you to agree to come on early days in this project of mine really means a lot. So I wish you nothing but the best, continued success. Keep on doing what you're doing. Please, more essays. I tell Ryan all the time, I'm like, Raptors win, I need a Stephen Brunt essay to know how I should feel about this. Pandemic hits, I need a Brunt essay to tell me how I should feel about this. That's what you do. You explain to me how I should feel about sports. And that's the ultimate compliment.
How about baseball returns to Montreal? That might work.
Please, can you make me a promise that you will write that essay when it comes?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
That one I will promise you.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it. Good luck with the new show on the radio, which started on Monday. I wish you guys the best and continued success. Again, thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Ariel. Always a pleasure. Hope to see you in person soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.